Hi, it's Charles. Welcome to another episode of the Greenr Tech podcast. Today, we've got something which aligns with an episode we filmed a few weeks back in regards to carbon offset, and we'll be looking at the part that technology can play today in really stemming carbon development from source and how we can look to stem an individual's carbon footprint moving forwards. So we're actually speaking to Jimmy Murray. He is CEO and co-founder of a company called Greenr Technologies. Now, Jimmy, in a nutshell, comes from a successful corporate background and, like many now in this industry, has seen an opening and really coming off the back of his involvement in growth and innovation, has now founded a startup with a focus in green technology, as the name suggests. Jimmy, thanks very much for joining me today.
Perfect. Thanks for having me, Charles. Pleasure to be here.
Now, I think the first question is quite a broad one, in fact, but really, I just wanted to ask you, from your sort of early days and what you've seen moving forwards, what part does technology play in reducing an individual's carbon footprint?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it plays a pretty integral part. What we've seen since the start of the pandemic, lots of people were forced to work from home. They had to, isolate in many cases, and technology transformed in the home. It become your way to work, communicate, exercise in many cases. We saw Joe Wicks take off, and all forms of kind of relaxation when people couldn't leave the house. So I think the adoption of technology, digital commerce, etc., has rapidly accelerated across all age groups in the past 18 months. And when we look forward to the biggest challenge facing humanity, that is without doubt climate change. It will play an integral role in helping people, first of all, measure their carbon footprint through their activities, whether that's through energy consumption, what they buy online, their food, but also their travel and work commitments. So in terms of managing your carbon footprint, it's very hard to do that if you first don't. And I think technology is is a key enabler of helping people measure that through their daily activity and purchases.
Yeah, definitely. I think it definitely flipped the whole aspect of, mentioned keeping fit at home. And I think even that plays an integral part on the knock-on effects then of maybe not necessarily the carbon footprint, but the overall sort of health and well-being of individuals as well, and the sort of health risks and further knock-on effects and strain on resources, obviously heavily linked to that early side of keeping fit and essentially using technology to measure it. And niching down a little bit now then, in terms of what you've been up to the past, am I right in thinking about 6 months now?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And what is it then you've been working on at Greenr Technologies to make a difference in that individual's carbon footprints?
Yeah, so Greenr has been thought about as a vision and a company for a number of years by our core team. And the original idea was to help put the emissions data in the hand of the general public through a mobile application to give people the data and the necessary knowledge to live low carbon lives. I joined at the beginning of April. That's when we launched our beta version of the app on both app stores. And we've really focused on how can we help organizations, businesses, as well as individuals, translate their kind of net zero ambitions into concrete action for their workforce. So the app that we've got available, the beta version of the app called Greenr, allows users to download the app for free. You can complete an onboarding questionnaire, which gives you a view of your carbon footprint for a typical year. And then users have the ability to track the daily food and travel through the app to see what the related carbon footprint of that is. So we call it a climate companion app because it goes beyond just giving you a carbon footprint for the year to helping you track kind of business commuting, personal travel, and your diet, and what contribution to your carbon footprint that plays.
Yeah, and in terms of So obviously it's pulling together data really from a number of sources.
Mm-hmm.
And out of those, then what are the main sort of features in which Greenr sort of taking in when looking to try and generate and calculate someone's carbon footprints?
Yeah, so our travel calculator is linked to the DVLA. So you can input your car registration plate number through the app. It links the make, model, type of engine, and accurate carbon footprint emissions. So that's a really good feature for our users, because it's not just an aggregated kind of carbon or length of the journey. We also link up to like planes, trains, and public transport as well. You can put in those journeys. And then if you cycle or jog or walk instead of taking one of those carbon emissions kind of methods of transport, it shows how you're reducing your carbon footprint as a result of that. So that's the travel side. On the food side, we have over 9,000 food items in our database with their related emissions. So users can import their breakfast, lunch, and dinner. As I say, there's 9,000 items in the database, and it'll give a carbon footprint of each meal, which you can save for future inputs. Or what we found is some users like to use our quick calculator, so that at the end of each week, they can import very quickly what their diet looked like for the whole week, and that they can allocate that to different days. So at the moment, we're primarily focusing on food and travel, which is a large contributor of people's scope 3 emissions, as they're called. But in time, we want to link with kind of your smart device, biggest asset, which is usually their people.
Yeah, nice. And I think a lot of it maybe comes down to like the social side, but what factors do you see as the biggest driver then for an individual using your app? What factors do you see as being something which might open their eyes to make changes?
Yeah, so from my perspective, until you actually understand your carbon footprint and understand what are the biggest contributors to that carbon footprint, it's very hard to make it real what this climate crisis is. So the average carbon footprint in the UK is about 12 tons per person. But what does that mean? That's just a number. But to illustrate the kind of the size of the challenge that we've got as humanity, so we need to get that from 12 tons per year down to 2 tons in order to meet the Paris Agreement's targets. So that's a sixth of what we currently emit today, which is an enormous challenge. And what we hope to do through the app is show through your the onboarding questionnaire and your daily travel what are the biggest contributors to that. So when I first kind of started using the app to track my diet, I took a train from Liverpool to London, which is over 200 kilometers, 280 I think. And then that evening I met an old colleague to catch up, and I found it stark how similar in carbon emissions the beef burger was to a train journey of over 200 miles. But that was kind of a penny drop moment that I think a lot of our users will find, which is similar to MyFitnessPal. If you've used that before, when you put your diet in and it churns out a calorie for that, you can put your diet through the Greenr app, and that shows you the carbon emissions of that. And obviously red meat, dairy products have enormous carbon footprints that I don't think the average person in the supermarket would fully appreciate. You just see a package of set of burgers or steak, but you don't understand how much carbon has been used to feed, grow a cow, and the methane that the cow emits in the field. It's quite staggering, and I think in the future they'll look back at this period in time and be confused why people weren't aware of the carbon emissions of everything that we consumed, ate, bought, and sold, because it does have a significant impact in the world. And what we hope to do is, once we inform people of the carbon emissions of their daily life, we can give them intelligent recommendations and tips on how to lead more sustainable lives. Because once you know something, you know what you can do to improve your environmental impact. But I still think we're at the stage where we need to educate and engage, full workforces and the general public on the key levers of their carbon footprint, first and foremost. So there's an education task here, and then engaging them in pledges to reduce that, create incentives for people to, gain points, discounts, rewards for leading greener lives. Because at Greenr, we believe, we reward people who are acting more sustainably rather than, shame people who aren't. It's more of the carrot than the stick.
Yeah, nice. And absolutely, I think it's sort of leveraging, isn't it, on that social awareness side of it. And the more people that are using the app, the more people that are seeing it. And like you mentioned there, with the train journey versus burger being a similar sort of carbon generation with the both of them is incredible, because ultimately we see a train as such a massive sort of structure of engineering, a feat of engineering, and your simple beef burger you don't think anything about when just grabbing or ordering. And we recently done something, a podcast on micromobility and how easy it is now to just pick food from your phone. Often it's picking out on the weekends, but I think ultimately maybe there's ties then within that fast food world and that carbon world where it can really sort of open people's eyes on what's being generated. And do you think then, you sort of mentioned on maybe what the future holds, do you think even in supermarkets and from a dietary standpoint, do you think now we have everything stamped with what's good for you, what's not good for you, the calories, and I think there's been a whole push on more openness around the nutrients, etc. involved. But do you see in the future some sort of labeling, some sort of markings on there in the carbon units that package or that product's been produced to get there?
Yeah, I do. I think some leading brands of plant-based kind of milk already display the carbon footprint of their products. And I think similar to how the salt and sugar into contents of food was displayed probably a decade or more ago, we'll move into this space where it will track the source of the food and the related carbon emissions of growing it, transporting it, because it's important for people to give them that transparency. Because I think once people do know that, then they will or should change their ways if it's affordable and makes sense to lead more sustainable lives. But until we have that visibility, it's very hard to try and get humanity to make the necessary changes when they don't know what the biggest contributors or most polluting sources of consumption and companies that they support are.
Yeah, and it becomes more open as well. And I think something which actually struck me earlier in a conversation was that part of the social awareness side of it, a lot of people I think maybe just aren't aware, and maybe they don't understand that whole sort of social responsibility to do so, and obviously sometimes need that data-driven approach to be able to see that stark comparison in the difference there. And in the future, more so looking at that business to business side. You mentioned now there's a few thousand users that are on the app, and ultimately giving you sort of loads of feedback. But from very much more of a corporate standpoint, what do you see then for businesses moving forwards? Although they're getting a good idea of their carbon sort of credits and their generation, do you see then more of a sort of alignment to the staff in terms of their sort of camaraderie then through the gamification side?
So there's a few important things happening on from a regulatory point of view. So in the UK, there's a Better Business Act, which is making its way through Parliament. It's got cross-parliamentary support, and part of that is it proposes to update the Business Act to mandate ESG reporting at every board level. So I think from a business environment point of view, very soon ESG reporting will be mandated, and we need standard reporting on that. So I think that's close from a top level point of view. I think bottom up, the anxiety around climate change is only increasing. So you would have seen the IPCC report a couple of weeks ago, which mentioned code red for humanity. And the extreme weather that we're seeing across the globe in every region is very very disconcerting for all generations, but particularly the young generation, which are seeing a lot of the problems that have developed over the course of the last 100 years really becoming real now. So this climate change isn't an issue for our grandkids to deal with. We need to deal with it straight away. And, with the Paris Agreement, they outlined what targets need to be met to avert the climate crisis. And already we're missing those targets. So what we try and do is translate climate policies into pledges, which make it real for your employees. Because often when a corporation sets a net zero target, it cannot feel real. Sometimes a policy just sits on a intraweb or it's an email that's shared out, but engagement in those policies are not tracked, or they don't get as much engagement as they would have hoped. So I think where Greenr plays a role is educating and engaging your workforce in policies through pledges. So if you signed up to a pledge to switch your renewable energy provider, for example, one of our brand partners is Octopus Energy, and you can do that through Greenr with a code and get rewards as part of that. So we hope to have a number of brand partners behind each pledge, so that not only can people sign up to a pledge, but they can fulfill it through the app and be rewarded for their previous sustainable behaviors. Because as I mentioned, when they log their food, travel, and participate in challenges, they receive points within the app that they can redeem later on as rewards. So that's what we're trying to build, which is kind of a employer engagement platform that puts emissions data in the hand of your workforce. It gives businesses aggregated emissions data through a dashboard, so they can see what their carbon footprint is in real time, and gives them the ability to roll out pledges to try and reduce that at source where possible. So that's our purpose at Greenr. We hope to halve the emissions of all our users by 2025. So ahead of the UN's target of 2030. And we plan to do that in the most fun, intuitive, and engaging way possible.
Yeah, and I think it's applying to the masses as well, isn't it? So it's not, there's some products, there's some maybe features, etc. you can buy which are incredibly expensive, but with Greenr's proposition, it's appealing to the masses. It's anyone can download the app, anyone can sort of go through this beta version at the moment and get an understanding. And like you mentioned earlier, an average of 12 tons generated per person in the UK at the moment, which realistically needs to be 2, is head of a long way to go. But for those that aren't satisfied, even at 2, what can they do then, through Greenr to try and bring themselves down to net zero? Is there anything that you can provide?
Yeah, of course. So our biggest ambition is to reduce at source where possible for users. But so my other co-founder, Gabrielle, she's got family in Canada. So she's taken a trip for August to work from Canada. And she tracked that through the app. And when she landed, she offset it through the app. So she kind of invested in a carbon removal project through the Greenr app, which captures carbon by protecting rainforests or supporting renewable energy plants to do that. So she's kind of got a clean bill of health, which is just as well, because we've got a company competition going on. She's on my team, so she could have sunk us by taking that flight. But yeah, we offer all users the ability to buy carbon offsets through Gold Standard or VCS to get to net zero as soon as they wish. And then obviously through using the app on a daily basis, they can see the biggest contributors to the carbon footprint, make sustainable lifestyle changes to reduce that at source. But before I was involved in Greenr and thought about it, I hadn't even heard of carbon offsetting and didn't realize that you could purchase these to account for your carbon emissions. So I went net zero as soon as in April, as soon as the app was live, because we need people to support these projects to really make a difference across the world in capturing carbon and reducing humanity's environmental footprint.
Yeah, and I think definitely the recent weather events. I actually ran a poll recently on LinkedIn, and just to get, I've actually ran the same one probably 5 months ago, and it was completely different view towards carbon offset, from the one 5 months ago to the one now.
Really?
Now was, almost unanimously positive towards carbon offset. Obviously, a recent podcast that the Greenr Technology podcast put out was on carbon offset, and it was how to understand if the carbon offset that you're investing into, that you're using, is, you mentioned gold standard or VCS, and there's obviously a lot more litigation going through now in terms of understanding what is, what isn't, and ultimately gaining that standard to show that you're doing what you say on the tin, in essence. It's good to hear that you've obviously got some partners in that space that you can put your trust in, and that you know and you understand the projects they're working on. And ultimately, like you mentioned there, with the competitive side naturally coming out, which does summarize what Greenr are doing, with just bringing out that natural instinct within people. And as a business, you mentioned about the team that you're working with there. What do you see moving forwards? Is there any plans to grow headcount? Is there any plans to sort of grow the team to really cope with supplying for the masses?
Yeah, I mean, we've got really strong support from our investors and strategic advisors at the moment. So we've got a number of key recruits coming on board in the next quarter. Most notably a technology lead, and we plan to grow our team of developers significantly. And then the other element is in our B2B kind of sales and partnerships function. We've got quite ambitious plans to grow our team there. So really exciting second half of the year in store. And from kind of 2022 onwards, we've got really ambitious growth plans, and what I believe to be a credible path to get there. Really strong team of passionate people committed to driving an impact and making the world a better place, which is brilliant. It just brings so much energy and motivation every day. And each of our brand partners and businesses that we speak to very quickly, everyone understands the challenge that faces humanity. So it's really positive to see how fast we can move into discussions of when can we get started together on that journey. But yeah.
And if anyone's listening now and they're thinking, Christ, quite like the sound of Jimmy, I quite like what he's doing there at Greenr, and I quite like the sound of the team they're growing. Is there any sort of skill sets, any mindset? What do you look for when you're making a hire?
So for us, passion about society, the environment, and driving an impact is a must. That's kind of a key part of our DNA. It's passionate people, determined to make a difference. I think once you get people who are passionate on board, no problem is insurmountable, because passionate people are usually very they come at a challenge from a diverse perspective, and never seem they're never kind of beaten. You just keep trying to, how can we tackle this? And I think from humanity's point of view, this is the biggest challenge we're facing, if not have ever faced. And we need all the world's greatest minds thinking about how can we drive change at an individual level, but also a systemic kind of large scale corporate and governmental level. So yeah, passionate people, I think, who understand the scale of the challenge ahead. Curious people, problem solvers, people who continuous lifelong learners, so go above and beyond their kind of day jobs to develop their skill set or learning. That's another part of our DNA. I think that they're the two. And pretty much, if you've got an appetite to learn, if you're passionate, curious, and you've showed good history of being successful in role, we're happy to talk to anyone who's willing to work in this sector.
Nice. And they can find you, as some people, I think, you might make the mistake of spelling Greenr as it is, but it's Greenr. is the app on the App Store, isn't it? Which they can, am I right in thinking just anyone can download the beta version now, run themselves through the questionnaire, and ultimately, start making a difference, start understanding, and actually seeing that full perspective. And it'd be, I think, people that get on board now and start looking at the app would quite enjoy the journey, which the app and the development and the depth of what it's offering we'll see.
Yeah, certainly. The faster you download it, the more you can see how the app develops over time. We've got like fortnightly releases, and yet you can type in www.greenr.com to find our website. It's got all our contact details there, and I'm also available on LinkedIn if anyone wants to reach out. Jimmy Murray at Greenr Technologies Limited. But yeah, so we've got really good natural organic growth of like the general public downloading the app, calculating their carbon footprint, and then following us across our social channels. And as I mentioned earlier, similar to like a Strava or a MyFitnessPal, where your activity is translated into like calorie intake or a competition with your friends on miles taken, Greenr is uniquely positioned to help people quantify their carbon footprint and also track it on a daily basis and share it with their contacts and colleagues on how they're performing against their baseline, which is their initial onboarding questionnaire.
Nice. Jimmy, thanks very much for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure, because I've actually downloaded the app and forced the colleagues in the office to download it, and everyone's enjoying it. So I, for one, am looking forward to seeing how the app changes over time, and ultimately, hopefully, who ideally me can come out on top in the office on the lowest carbon footprints. So thanks again, and cheers.
Amazing. Thanks for having me, Charles. And yeah, do download it, get your company on board. It's a really fun way of engaging people in what's a very important issue, and making a difference. But thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Fantastic. Cheers.